Welcome to Flip Lesson 62 for 5th grade. Today we're going to look at some ideas with rounding and the idea of compatible numbers. Both these techniques get into the realms of estimating and how to make problems easier as you try and solve. And so we kind of just want to look at this concept and just understand how they both work. Our first example says, estimate the product of 39 and 19. Now, as I look at these two numbers, I want to analyze them and say, okay, I'm going to be multiplying. Now, what's the easiest way to multiply these two numbers together to give me a good estimate? Now, as I look at this, I'm going to say, okay, 39, that's close to 40. That makes a lot of sense. And 19, that's real close to 20, so that makes a lot of sense. So why don't I just do that and do 40 times 20. And then I can quickly solve for that and say, okay, that's going to be 8. Now, as I look at that, there are some questions that I want to ask myself. Is the product greater or less than the actual product, right? So is this estimate of 800, is that going to be more or less than what 39 times 19 would be? And this is important to estimate, to understand whether it is more or less. All right? And of course, I'm going to say greater. And it's greater because, and I can think that because I rounded up in this case, right? 40 went up, 20 went up, so really I'm using two larger numbers than what I had before. So how do I know that it's probably greater? Is because I rounded both numbers up, which makes sense that they would be slightly higher than the actual product of 39. However, we see using rounding as an example. Let's try this one. It says estimate the sum. All right, I'm going to look at these numbers. I'm going to add them together. So here I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to run to the nearest whole dollar. That's going to be $9. And around here, oh, that's $4. And around here, well, this is an interesting number. It's real close to $6.50. That's pretty easy math there. I think I'm going to leave it like that. That's kind of a compatible number. And this one looks like I can round that all up. Now, if I add these things together, right, this is going to give me 13. These two are going to give me $10.50. Those two together, these two together, and then I can add these two, and I'm going to get $23.50 when I add all of this together. And so as I look at that, is that a reasonable estimate? Yes. Let's try another one. It says estimate the perimeter of the rectangle. It says round before solving. Now I see 75 millimeters and 16 millimeters. Right. Now 75, that's a pretty square number. I know 75 plus the 75 down here, that's pretty easy math. That's going to be good. But this 16, I want to make that easier. I'm going to round that up to 20. And so if I have 20 on this side, I have 20 on this side, and that's going to give me 40. And in the end, I have an answer of 190 millimeters. Right? So in that case, I only rounded one of them to give me an answer because I felt that 75 was a fair estimate or a fair number to work with. Okay. However, I could have rounded this up to 80. And that would have been 80 plus 80 equals 160 plus that to give me a final answer. Let's look at one more example. It says the average elephant weighs 2,016 pounds. The average rhino weighs 1,805 pounds. Use compatible numbers to find the difference between these animals. Alright, so I'm going to take 2016, and I want to subtract from this. And I'm looking at this, and I'm going to write this down. Now, 1,806 is not the actual number. However, when I do my subtraction now, 6 minus 6 is 0, 1 minus 0 is that, and 20 minus 18 gives me 2. And that became a fairly simple problem. I didn't really use estimation. I used a number that was compatible with this 105. I made it 1,806, and that made subtracting my 6's much simpler. So, looks like my theme video ended. Let's go back to that idea. All right. Compatible numbers. Compatible numbers is using numbers that work to make things easier. It's not necessarily rounding everything up. Another thing I could have done is maybe I could just rounded this down to a number like that, and then subtracted that. And in the end, I've gotten a very compatible answer like that. So I've transformed those numbers using a compatible number to make my subtraction fast and easy, but still giving me a really good comparison between what I really want out of that problem. Alright. Now, using estimate, rounding, and compatible numbers can really come with how your mind works. And there are lots of different processes that you can take. So, as you work through these samples, you work through this, think, how do you choose rounding? How do you choose compatible numbers? The idea is find the easiest way to give you an accurate answer, or an answer that is close to what it should be. The easiest way. It's going to be using rounding, or is it going to be using compatible numbers? Alright, here are your samples. That is lesson 60.